So we will start the panel discussion, which is titled Enhancing Rural Livelihoods, What Can Be Done? And for this, I would invite the moderator for the panel discussion, Dr. Rajiv Lal, and each of our panelists, Surinder Jotka, Sarda Murlidharan, Dunu Roy, Sachit Madan, and G. Venugopal, to please come up and occupy your seats on the dais. A brief introduction to each of the panelists has already been enclosed in your folders, and so I will not go through the motions of introducing them again. I would straight away request Dr. Rajiv Lal to start the panel discussion.
Hello. May I ask?
Excuse me, can we all take our seats?
May I ask everybody to please settle down and take your seats? That is, if you want to stay and remain engaged in this discussion. But I would, in any case, request for everybody to quiet down. Is this loud enough? Okay. So we've had a very interesting morning. I hope you've had, at least those of you who haven't had a chance to read the report, which you probably have not, have now got a sense for the breadth and depth of the work that has gone into it, and some sense for the emerging narrative about the evolution of rural India. So what I'd like to do is, if you don't mind, I will go around in no particular order and seek to throw up a few issues emanating from this morning's report. And I think the most interesting, and I'm not contentious necessarily, but certainly the most interesting and fascinating aspect of rural India is the changing social, political dynamic of rural India. So let me start with you, Professor Jotka. The very simple-minded characterization that I had presented in the morning, that one of the fundamental changes that has taken place in rural India, in the narrative of the conflict, if you like, it's no longer landlord versus landless, but it is now farmers versus the state, or farmers versus industry. How much merit is there to this interpretation, and what are the implications of this?
Very happy you asked this question, because this is something that I immediately kind of started thinking about, and how in some sense this is one of the central issues, central narrative of the rural. And I think Minister also mentioned when he was talking about the problem with this binary of rural and urban, and how it gets constructed and then viewed, and both in academic circles as well as in policy circles you have this division between rural and urban. In a sense, this report questions that binary in a very kind of empirical way, and this is again a kind of transition from one set of binary to another set of binary. It's very, very important that fundamental change has happened. We don't really have so-called peasants in rural India. We don't really have the old kind of landlords in rural India. We don't even perhaps have the old kind of agricultural laborers in rural India. Everything is kind of in a process of what was being referred to as transition. Now the same comment that Mr. Lal was talking about in his discussion, we also heard about rural non-farm employment, nearly half of rural being engaged with non-agricultural occupations. So when one is talking about rural in terms of farm versus a farmer versus the state, one is again reducing rural to a land of farmers. This is something which has a lot of implications. even in the left-wing critiques of rural development, people who talk about farmer suicide, they begin with this assumption that every person who lives in the village is a farmer and owns land, works on agriculture, sells part of his land, gets indebted, and then commits suicide. Right? So this is a kind of continuation of the old binary of identification of rural with agriculture. In, for example, rural Punjab, not more than 1/4 of the working men are farmers, 1/4 in the rural areas. And still Punjab, the whole state is identified as a land of agriculture. Same would be the case with Punjab. If you have 50% of population directly employed in non-farm sector, 50% of rural population employed in non-farm sector. So when one is talking about farmer versus the state, one is not talking about the rural. One is talking about a segment of the rural. I think that is very, very important. Within those who are listed as employed in agriculture, there would be another 15% to 20% would be landless laborer or nearly landless laborer. And this report shows how small farmers or people who have less than 1 hectare of land have no choice but to also be involved in other occupation. What we call as households are pluriactive. Increasingly, all households are pluriactive in rural India. Not only those who have less than 1 hectare of land, even those who have 10 hectares of land, the so-called big farmers, they are also pluriactive in the sense that you cannot characterize the household as an agricultural household. There are 3 members, working members in the family. 2 of them are employed outside agriculture, and 1 is employed in agriculture. So methodologically, how do you talk about rural? It is no longer equal to agriculture. I think that is one lesson that we must learn, and this has implications. This has implications for policy. For example, when you talk about farmer suicide and create a kind of policy discourse in India, and then you assume rural to be agricultural to be farmer, and then you have a kind of huge amount sanctioned for that kind of category. Now, within agriculture also there are lots of differences, as we know, and this report in a sense brings out very sharply. Another point, if I have time, want to make, which thought I'll kind of discuss in the discussion here. We did hear about rural-urban continuum, and the minister was talking about how these rural settlements have been classified as census towns, and therefore they become urban, but they are half rural, half urban. They are neither here nor there, and there is a continuum, which is absolutely true. But this again is only a demographic classification. I think we need to go beyond demographics. Still, we continue to work with one notion of rural, as if there is one single rural. I think we must recognize at a conceptual, and then it has implications for kind of research that we do in social sciences or for policy, is to begin with this notion that rural is plural. One is that in country like India, there are tremendous diversities. You cannot speak in one voice about Jharkhand and about Haryana. These are very different landscapes in every sense of the term, in terms of their economic activity, in terms of their social life, in terms of their level of development, in terms of the level of underdevelopment, or whatever you like to call. One are these tremendous diversities, but within the village, you have many rurals. The moment you go to a Dalit locality, there is something totally different. Not even one of them owns even 1 acre of land. And there are 100 households in a village or 70 households in a village. And their rural is visualized, historically has been visualized very differently. Same is the case with trading communities there. And their trajectories of rural has been completely different. And obviously there are gender differences. We need to conceptualize those multiple ruralities if we want to then think of infrastructure. And infrastructure is not something which is a very general, neutral category. What road are you going to bring? We know the folk stories about village untouchability and drinking water and the well and who has access to what, how settlements are segregated and what is happening to them. I think we need to construct the dynamic picture of the rural, which to some extent has been done in this report and has been done very well, and that is also kind of an area which I think we must recognize, and we should not reduce rural either to numbers or to these kinds of binaries, which are very important at one level. They do reflect the process of change, but I think the reality is much more complex, and these complexities must be captured if we have to make policies effective, because they have implications for for issues of participation, issues of representation, and issues of development.
No, but I just wanted to press you on that a little more, since I think amongst the panelists you are the best place to address this class of issues. So we agree that there is an urban-rural continuum, that when we think of rural, it's not just agriculture, there's much more to it. There are multiple ruralities, as you call them. Broader question is, and I'm trying to draw out some essence, if there is any discernible one. These changes, economic changes and structural changes that have been happening in rural India, have they facilitated changes in traditional social and political hierarchies? Very specifically, is it just as hard to have social mobility as it was before, or has upward social mobility in rural India become easier?
The simple answer is yes, change is significant. In some areas I would say change is radical. Change is kind of completely transformational. You can't see the old village any longer, but there are regional variations, and there are significant regional variations. Everywhere it has not changed in the same way. There are multiple trajectories of change. We must recognize that. It's not difficult to classify them. It's not like once we are talking about multiple, therefore we can't make sense of it. We can easily identify 3, 4, 5 different trajectories of change that the rural India has followed in India, followed over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Caste, for example, does not exist any longer anywhere in the country the way it used to exist 30 years back, 40 years back. What in sociology we call as changes and continuities, I think that is very important to understand. The old structures of hierarchy, which in North India were called as Jajmani system, but there were also structures of class relations like bondage, they have almost everywhere significantly weakened, and in many places they have completely disappeared. And they are not. This has not happened simply because of the pressure from below. It has also happened because of the pressure from above or changes from the side. For example, capitalist farming, you can't work in capitalist agriculture with old kind of Jajmani relations. You need to have tractors. Tractors will have formalized relationship, and that transforms everything. You don't need a luhar, for example. You don't need a carpenter any longer. Or you don't need a potter because you have a tap in the village. So all that has made the old kind of occupations completely redundant. And these people then have obviously been released from the traditional structure of power and hierarchy, even if they want to. In case of Punjab, when I studied in the late 90s and 2000, 2001, I had conceptualized this process of change through process of dissociation, distancing and autonomy. That the old caste and occupation association has completely disappeared, and this has happened in Punjab and Haryana, these two states that I know very well because I have been working there. There has also been process of very conscious distancing of Dalit communities which are landless and who used to be always in a kind of bonded labor relationship with the big farmers. They have moved away from agrarian employment. They prefer to go to the town. They prefer working in kind of informal sector or whatever odd jobs have. And then there is a whole process of autonomizing them as a kind of community categories. So they will have separate village panchayat, they have separate temple, separate gurudwara in Punjab, so that they have nothing to do with the big dominant communities. So the answer is that change is radical. Change is very significant. But at another level, there are continuities, because these people continue to be assetless. And landlessness is very high among people who are either landless or the lower OBCs. And OBC is a very big category, but we can easily make a distinction. In any rural area you go, lower OBCs who have always been landless, and the upper OBCs, some of them have been dominant caste like the Gujars in Haryana and Western UP, or Jats in Gujarat, who are listed as OBCs, but they are not like the lower OBCs. The lower OBCs are non-untouchable, but they have always been landless. And this is a very large segment of rural population, 40 to 50% of rural population, which is completely landless. And their trajectories of change is very different. Even though the old order of caste hierarchy has disintegrated, their disabilities continue. When they want to go to the town to set up their own business, they have no collaterals. They don't have any assets. While it is much easier for somebody from a dominant caste, even if you have 3 acres of land, it makes a lot of difference because you have something to to kind of guarantee to the bank, and you can raise some loan, you have something to fall back upon. Even when people move out of agriculture, they don't sell their land, because land is very, very precious, because that takes care of your basic livelihood. If you have a lot of crises, if you don't get job in the urban area, you can always go back to the village. So these inequalities continue, and the options for change and mobility vary significantly across caste categories, and there are also social categories in terms of class, and that obviously again varies from region to region. For example, the landlessness among Dalits in Punjab and Haryana is very high. 95% of them are landless effectively. While you go to neighboring UP, around 25% of them are actually cultivators. In some areas, nearly 50% of Dalits own some amount of land or not. So the trajectories vary from region to region depending on their history, depending on the kind of nature of property relations they have had in the village, and depending also on the size of the village. For example, if you go to Himachal Pradesh, because of the smallness of settlements, dynamics is very different. Historically, Himachal Pradesh was one region where land reforms were very successful. Nearly 60% of Dalits were able to get land, and there are some caste communities, Kolis, which is the largest scheduled caste in Himachal, nearly 70% of them are cultivators. So once you have cultivation, you have no poverty. That is the reason why you find Himachal human development indicators doing much better, and their level of poverty is virtually zero. I mean, though people do get reported, and I did some empirical work there, that the Sarpanch told me that we get quota of 20 household हैं जी आपके below poverty line में, अब किसको बांटने हैं, that is up to you. So people are not really poor in regions like this where you have had land reforms and there has been commercialization of agriculture. The absolute poverty is virtually, chronic poverty is virtually absent, and landlessness makes a lot of difference, and this in a sense goes with caste. So they are both continuities and significant changes.
I think that's a useful backdrop for the rest of the conversation. So the message I take away is that there is radical change, but with certain continuities. It's very dangerous to generalize in a country as diverse as India, but I suspect that it would be safe to say or assert that radical change has occurred in rural India across the country. Nature of the change may be different, and the nature of the continuities that survive are also different. On that note, Chada, wanted to ask you, you have had very interesting experience on, not, I won't say two sides of the fence, but different aspects of rural institution building. So one is the whole Kudambashri experience and empowerment and participation, and now it's livelihood development. To Professor Jodka's point that, and this has also come out in the report, that most of the interventions historically of government of India, irrespective of which party, but have been in the nature of protective schemes. So while they are temporary salves, they do not help create sustainability, don't lift people out of poverty. And to do that, you need at least two things, or so the literature suggests. One is participation and empowerment, voice in decision making, which is one aspect of your experience. The other one is actually government scheme designed to develop livelihoods. So would you comment on that, given in the backdrop with the Professor Jodka's comments in the background, which is to say that given this radical change, right, what has been your experience with actually facilitating real participation and voice? How has that translated into tangible results? And second, this point about creating livelihoods rather than just providing a protective salve, is that the right way to go? What is the initial experience with that?
Yeah, thank you.
So it'll start
If
working.
not,
Yeah, it'll start working. Yeah.
Once it's
Yeah.
close it, but then maybe I.
It's not working?
try.
Yeah, it's
Start
fixed.
start
You can hear
working
me?
here.
Taking the question first of participation and empowerment, I would like to say that working in the development sector, working with the poor, one thing you do know is that that inequality is not something that can be managed from outside, and it is diminished capability of the poor to change or transform their livelihoods arises out of unequal relations which tend to be exploitative. And even when we're talking of changing rural dynamics, for example, in the national mission for livelihoods, what we are looking at is saying that let's target the bottom 25%, and if we look at that bottom 25%, the questions of whether they are BPL or not, actually we find that the entire infrastructure of BPL itself is exploitative. It keeps genuine poor out. I saw with interest that you talk of 50% of tribals and 45% of scheduled caste communities as being poor, whereas wherever you go, you find that percentage is actually closer to 90 or 100%, and that is the reality. Why do these people don't even get listed? They live so away from any institution, any public delivery institution, that there is no access. The census, one after the other, don't even recognize them. So the invisibility of the poor is a huge challenge. And one dimension that we tried to do in Kudumbashree was to just say, A is that let the people of the community themselves identify who amongst them are poor. It bears a great similarity with the NREGA program, which is also self-selection. Anyone who is willing and finds it necessary to do manual labor can come in. And NREGA as a program has been far more inclusive than any other poverty alleviation program that we've actually tried. In our history of experience, the NREGA program has been far more successful. Two reasons. One is it's rights-based, and two, it's self-selection. And these have therefore been actually able to bring people in, which still has issues of membership because of the fact that your governance structure also inhibits the strengthening. For sustainability, for example, the presence of the Panchayat Raj institution is very relevant, and I was listening with interest that, it was also very heartwarming to see that the major chunk of the discussion on the report actually revolved around the space of Panchayat Raj institutions. You go down to the poor, I think we were paid by Mani Shankar here. Yes. You go down to the poor, you go down to also very committed functionaries. They themselves are in a quandary as to what position they should take. Because while you see panchayats as institutions for the poor, you also see them as institutions against the poor. As the rural elite, as institutions of elite capture, of institutions that reinforce power hierarchies. But I would say, from my experience again in Kudumbashree, that it doesn't matter. The important thing is, it's important to convert these into institutions of governance for the poor, and the way to go about it is to also increase the citizen voice. The poor, as long as they are disorganized, will not acquire enough voice, will not recognize themselves as vote banks, will not influence, and will not become, that visibility will not get them anywhere. That invisibility will not get them anywhere. So the important thing is they need to be able to leverage their rights. For leveraging, they first need to know about their rights. For knowledge and for transparency, there has to be outreach, and there's got to be inclusion. The only way to do it is by creating powerful institutions of the poor. And perhaps if government, which is what government is trying to do right now, takes away its focus from delivering programs and trying to just hold up the poor into strengthening these institutions, you will see change. Because by strengthening institutions of the poor, A, you are ensuring that larger groups of poor who are excluded come in the system. B, by their recognition that collectively they have a voice which they don't have individually. And C, therefore, starting to negotiate with power structures, starting with the Gram Sabha. I would actually disagree with the minister saying that there is only one Menda Lekha. Of course not, there are more, but they are not being recorded. And also they have not been sustained the way they should be. You have local leadership coming up, bringing in organizations and being able to take on the Gram Sabha. We've had amazing experiences even in the heart of Bundelkhand, where institutions of poor women have actually been able to reduce corruption in Narega, have been able to hold the Panchayat accountable, have been able to move from virtual registration of the job card to real work. And real work that ends in greater assetization of the poor, as well as bringing out a natural resource management that will enable livelihoods of the poor. So empowerment of the poor through institutions, through building their institutions, and also investing in capabilities, in believing that maybe the poor themselves are a huge community resource that can be banked upon. And we did that in Kudumbashree. We took out all external facilitators and said that from among women, we will create trainers. From among women, we will create auditors. From among women, we will create IEC activists. And doing that has been transformative because they relate to the poor far better. Not that they wouldn't have their own interests in mind, but then you also find that their capability for being sensitized to the poorer amongst them is also much higher. And this together works in, we worked with the women, but we also worked with the Panchayat. We worked with the Panchayat, with the institutions which we see as problematic for the poor, and talked them into believing that the poor were necessary for local development. Talked them into believing that local economic development, the drivers were the poor, and that they needed to associate them, and that it was important that they listen to the poor to further their own agenda. And through that, by recognizing the poor as a vote bank, you start investing in the poor. You start investing in helping them. You start investing in the institutions of delivery to the poor. And that can be transformative.
So just a quick follow-up question. I'm trying to make sense of what he said and what you're saying. So if there is radical change, and all the empirical evidence suggests that there is radical societal, political change in process in different degrees across the country, the fact that the poor still remain largely invisible, that's a debatable point, but let's say that is the case, they remain largely invisible, is the explanation that we are now in this transition whereas traditional social hierarchies are breaking down, that has not yet led to influential voice away from the old hierarchical structures for the reasons that you seem to be ascribing, i.e. they're not aware of their rights, they need institutions of governance that do not exist because existing political institutions of governance are captured. And you didn't say so, but I was going to say delivery systems and the bureaucracy are also captured.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, because the bureaucracy is a reflection of the larger society.
Right.
And so it will not have a commitment which larger society does not have. And if larger society does not see it necessary to hold the bureaucracy accountable to the poor, well, that's how it will work.
So the 73rd Amendment in and of itself is not enough. We need other kind of institutional change.
Yes, but I would also like to say that the fact that the local government is the government that is closest to the poor, and therefore it is the government that can be held, that can be made accountable to the poor. The state is far away. The center is invisible altogether.
How would you make them accountable?
To the poor? And that's by strengthening institutions like the Gram Sabha, by sensitization of the local governance structures, by building community management, bringing community into management of public service delivery institutions. So one is normative. There's got to be a normative support. The other is about investing of the government itself, deciding that it will invest in developing the capability of local governance structures, which today we haven't. Today we are in the pitiable position of having to teach panchayat members also about their rights, about various schemes, not about how to deliver those schemes, or about going even further to say let's devolve funds and have the panchayats themselves scheme. So the whole space of panchayats and planning is right now a big open area.
One more quick question. Your experience with Kudumbashree working with women.
Yes.
I know from financial services space that women are different. I mean, it's well documented that as credit risk, women are just far more trustworthy. So, in terms of political action,
right,
and institution building, in your experience, women working with each other across caste lines and traditional social divisions, is that easier? Are they able to transcend those more easily, or is it just as challenging?
I'm just trying to understand that, because I come from a state where this was not too much of an issue, because you did not have habitations which were segregated on the basis of caste or religion. So, a neighborhood group would have all kinds of people in it, cutting across classes, cutting across castes. But I come to Bihar, for example, in the Jivika program. They have been targeting Musahir habitations and creating organizations of women who are basically from the scheduled caste community. And now they are finding a challenge in integrating them with women in other mainstream communities in the village. So how we handle that challenge is something that we're still on a learning curve about, and I really wouldn't be able to say definitely. But if you looked at Kerala, where it's not that caste differences don't exist, they're just subterranean. It's been interesting to see, because even there we found, despite of all this, unless you targeted scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities specifically, the institutions of the poor will not necessarily absorb them or bring them into power, into positions of leadership. So there has to be a proactive intervention that encourages the women to think differently. But I believe that they are far more eager learners, because they have been denied food. Yeah. Because of that denial is in a sense their strength, and we could use that to be transformed.
Okay, interesting. Let me move on to and pick up on this question of training, livelihood development, and creation, teaching them teaching the poor how to fish rather than giving them the fish, right? That's a very
very satisfying.
Yes, it's very easy to say, but I suspect it's very hard to do. What is your experience with livelihood creation?
It's a very interesting twist on the earlier question as to whether people can survive in such situations, and whether, in a sense, technical training gives them the ability. 45 years ago I went to a village in Madhya Pradesh. Firstly, to see, before one can train somebody, can one survive? being a trained person. So I actually was repairing cycles and pump sets in the district, and I found I could survive just on earning from repairing cycles, pump sets, agricultural equipment, carts, and so on. But the reason I suspect was because I had backup. I had money to buy stuff, I could access credit, I could access decision makers. That's the way it's possible, because in that process I think we must have trained about 500 young boys in repairing pump sets and so on, and not one of them was able to survive on their own. Not one. And essentially it's because they didn't have access to that infrastructure. And if they don't have access to infrastructure, then the only thing they can do is work for somebody else. So they join PWD or the coal mines or the thermal power plants or a garage owner or somebody who was selling tractors as paid mechanics. But again, most of them did not get regular wages. They were all on contract. So I think it's important to understand that training by itself is not going to make very much difference. Actually, training people on the job in skills is perhaps the easiest thing to be done. It's not difficult at all. And I think anybody with any sense can train people in a technical trade within a month, not more than that. But the problem is survival. What do you do with that technical skill? Now, to offset that, for instance, you've been talking about artisans, most of whom belong to the lower castes or the scheduled caste. And the artisanal trade has been severely impacted by the growth of markets. So people who are making, say, bronze bells in Odisha or textiles in Rajasthan and so on, their market is no longer a domestic market. It's very interesting. Cow bells, which were earlier made to tie to cows in Rajasthan and Haryana, and the distinctive feature of the cow bell was the tone. So the cow owner could recognize where his cow or bull was merely by the sound of the bell. Artisans who make these bells are no longer making them for cows, they are making them for wall hangings in Belgium. And consequently the market has changed. Because the market has changed, there are huge technical pressures that you've got to use these kind of colors in textiles. You've got to use, the cowbell not only must sound good, which is what the cow owner was concerned with, but it now must also look good. And not only look good, now the European market demands that lead content in that cowbell must be below a certain percentage, which means that your production technology begins to change in response to that market. And because it begins to change, what we are seeing in all these artisanal trades is that more and more toxic materials are entering the trade itself.
I see.
Because first you see, textiles, most of the dyes that were used earlier were vegetable dyes, but no longer. Now they're all aniline dyes because the cost is going down the moment you use aniline dyes. But if you use aniline dyes, the social and environmental externalities start shooting up. So essentially the fabric is exported and people use it in Europe, but the externalities are left behind in villages in Odisha and Andhra and so on. So I think this change in technology has not been very happy for artisans. The third one, which is even more interesting, and I think that is perhaps where some of the clues may lie. We used to get a lot of requests for training on other things, not on agricultural productivity and so on. One of the Santosh Matthew was here a little while ago. He's gone off, I noticed. But we received a request from a group in Bihar, in Daltonganj, saying a dam is coming up here and we don't understand what this dam is all about. All we are told is 19 villages are going to get submerged. So what can we do about it? And we went there and we trained 19 boys, I remember, in how to measure land, which is not part of normal training. Livelihood training does not include training in land. Training in land measurements and training in water measurements. And they needed that training because they had to contest the irrigation department's claims as to how much land would get submerged and how much water would be available for irrigation. Once that was done, and then they started doing their own studies, they found instead of 19 villages, 26 villages are going to get submerged. And instead of the dam lasting for 50 years because of the silt gradually filling up the dam, it wouldn't last more than 17 years because the siltation rates were far higher. And as far as irrigation was concerned, instead of a catchment of 32 villages getting water, they found that the water available would probably go to only about 16 villages. Now you see, the moment you do this kind of quantification, the benefit cost ratio of the dam changes dramatically. It no longer becomes viable. Because now you have got to pay for more land being submerged, less water is there for irrigation, and the siltation rates are going to fill up the dam much quicker. So they were able to contest it, and so far, this was 32 years ago, government has still not been able to build that dam. But what was interesting was what they did further. They found that measurement of land and water was actually a very good thing for their own agricultural practices. So they started measuring all their village ponds as to, how much land was it occupying, how much water was there, how much land could be irrigated from that water. And I think they measured it in 180 villages. Now in order to do that, they needed more people to do this measurement. So they used the government's TRISEM scheme to train people, but not in trades that TRISEM wanted. They trained people in water and land measurement. And 180 villages, every village then had a young man who could do these measurements, and they called the man the village JE, not the government JE. And then they went to, Santosh was the DC of Daltonganj at that time, and they went to him and they said, here are 180 villages, here's the data, why don't we develop these water schemes more and provide decentralized irrigation and decentralized employment? He was very sympathetic. He put in, I think, 2 crores at that time from the drought relief budget into this. And 180 villages, they built 320 structures for water management.
So it's so interesting.
So it's interesting where you get training of this kind.
Yeah, so in fact, what you seem to be arguing is that participation and voice in the design of training is equally important and potentially that much more transformative. Because if you come up with, I'll teach you this trade to be a carpenter, an electrician, etc., it may not have the desired effect for the reasons you described. But if with participation of the community you are able to give them, the training they think they believe they need, it can actually have a much more powerful impact. So our approach to creating livelihood schemes and delivering training needs to change quite dramatically.
Yes, and I would say that, the livelihoods missions that are coming up are all top down.
Right.
There's somebody at the top who says, people need to be trained in IT, or people need to be trained in this, that. And they have no clue about what... I mean, I would actually ask many of them to actually, do the training on themselves and then go and try and earn a livelihood. And if they can do it...
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a very interesting point you make because, one of the things we did in Kudumbashree, our trainings were also similar. You had government fund coming in and we would sit together and decide what possible trades could you get into, what kind of trade, and everybody was trying to come up with new ideas to train. But what we did later on, once the community institutions, the women organizational network was in position, was to say that every year, let us get the neighborhood group to just sit around and discuss what it is that they would like. Some of them would be interested in training, some of them would be interested in getting into agriculture, finding out also the demand for Narega. So there was a bottom-up planning which went in, and so sometimes they could not be very clear about what exactly they wanted, but they did say that, yeah, we would like to get into some enterprise option. And then what happened was at the Panchayat level, whoever wanted to be trained was called and given a menu of options. They discussed that, some of them agreed, some of them didn't agree, some of them came with new solutions, and out of that, yet another round of training, and then they get organized into groups to do to figure out what they want to do.
Let's make a shift of gear from this to the great public-private partnership in agriculture and the experience of ITC with contract farming. First, if you could give us a very quick snapshot of your success or challenges in dealing with or building out contract farming. But secondly, if you could try and relate it to these various comments that have been made, how have you had to design your programs in view of the social political realities on the ground? That would be very interesting to hear.
Sure. Give it a shot. The generation we belong to, which has started working 30 years ago, was very different. We were born in the license Raj. We actually were, but they were not successful private companies. It was a public sector kind of a model. Is the voice clear at the back?
No, it's quite clear.
Okay. It was a different generation, and when we were being talked about that we should do CSR, etc., was not something which was inside of the public sector role and so on and so forth. But at some point in time, ITC realized, and it has this triple bottom line concept, as you know, which is C, which is social, economic, and environment. And as we have learned, it actually is now, it's not unrelated. Each of them is very much related. And our first experience really happened with the Chopal system, in a sense, where, as you know, that was started several years ago. And the idea was to actually, we can't build a road, but can we build a digital road? And therefore, can we, I think he was creating awareness. We are today creating awareness with people about their rights. This was creating awareness with farmers and linking them to the market. Look, what are market rates like? How do you get them extension without actually being physically present and having an army of extensions and so on and so forth? So we started offering to them things which the rest of the trade was not. Okay? So two things happened. The trade was unhappy, and therefore we had a struggle on, that we should be shut because we were a private company, but fortunately the farmers helped us. The second thing is that as farmers started gravitating towards us, the trade also upped its change. What this also meant is an increase in income levels at the farmer level, because you got more money out of it. There was and that money and that that extra income is when you start expounding your rights. Now Chopal has gone into many other things per se. We actually looked at skill building. We said we will do skill building for retail when organized retail was coming in a big way, But organized retail then kind of floundered, so we really didn't do much. But we're still working on the area of how do we use this platform for skill building, and the key is getting the skill which will get them employment. Because you can teach them the skill, but where is the employment opportunity within the village? But then we went and took this a little further with women, like you said. With women, the area was in the area of creating livelihood and agarbattis. It's not too much money, but that little money gave that woman that self-respect and what she could then spend for her kids. And I can continue on that, but let me come back to contract farming. So with this e-Chopal network, we did not do contract farming. We actually gave them a price option per se. We have then subsequently moved on to many products where we are doing contract farming. And what we are really recognizing in contract farming, and that's really a very small part now of our program because it is more non-contract farming, but actually getting farmers to grow what the market needs. Because this digital highway also said that look, we don't want a variety of wheat, we want B variety of wheat because that's in short supply, that will get you a better premium, or we want you to grow these particular crops. So it's really now signaling the market to them. It is giving them the option, the skills, the extension, the seed, and a ready market, but not giving them a price because they want to participate in the way, especially when food prices are moving, they want to participate in the higher end of pricing. And this is now going beautifully well. As you know, our it's now part of our business model where we are now retailing Ashirwad and we are able to now source wheat which is identified. Otherwise it comes to the mandi, loses its identity. Now there are multinational, there are companies coming to us because there is something called an agriculture gap which needs traceability. Now how do you get traceability if you are buying something from a mandi? So now your contract farming is not there, but you're getting him a better price because his material is now getting traced. It is being supplied to somebody who's willing to pay a premium for that traceability and then moving into another arena. We did kind of a contract farming in a completely different area, and that is in the area of a paper business. What happened there is that, India is a huge importer of pulp and we have a very large paper business. So there was a point of time where we said, do we continue pulp or do we actually become self-sufficient? And then around Khammam, which is where our plant was located, there's a lot of land which is not useful for agriculture. It's not really very productive land. But if you did forestry there, it took 7 years to grow the normal trees which are available. That's too long for people to actually wait. So we went back and did a back end. We got R&D into place. We got clones which are able to do this in 4 years. But the farmer is saying, I can't wait for 4 years. I plant a crop, 90 days, 100 days, I need money. So we said, okay. Then we arranged a financing system by which they're able to put this money. And today I think something like 165,000 hectares are covered in this. And that farmer is getting 50,000 rupees a hectare per annum, but after a 4-year gap. But now he's got into a cycle. So the contract there was, we will buy or produce, because if he grows the trees, it doesn't really work out per se. So something, now the farmer is now saying 50,000 is not enough, I want to do something more. And when you engage with the farmer, so what is the next stage now is agroforestry. We have now devised a system by which we are able to grow other crops along with trees. And this income will go from 50,000 to 85,000 per se. The key really what I wanted to mention is that when a corporate starts engaging with farmers and rural communities, we are not engaging to say, okay, we want to increase the depth of our distribution, we want to sell them more shampoos and ABCD. But how do we increase their income levels, which will then obviously then come back into consumption, number one. Number two, when you're involved with them, then you understand their needs better. When we went in, we were clueless like anybody else. And as that engagement grows, improvement starts coming out of it per se. One of the latest things which is happening is a key focus on animal husbandry, which is to do with, we are now doing about 9 lakh cattle. And here again, it was a very peripheral engagement, but now we are now saying that, okay, you got a normal cattle. How do I increase this to a hybrid cattle, which will give you 3 times more milk for a longer period of time? So that's what's happening. So there's artificial insemination happening, there is cattle care happening. But then you have to find an outlet for the additional milk. If there's more milk created in that area, then how do you sell it? So now we're actually moving into dairy. So it's being integrated. It started in a different way, but a business is evolving out of it. And within dairy, we think we will give them higher value addition, segregating different kinds of milk, some work which we are doing in, type A, type B kind of stuff, and type 1, type 2. So those are some of the progressions which are really happening in this area, not beyond contract farming itself.
Interesting. Last set of questions for Venu. Given your experience with skill development, I think one of the themes that comes up in the discussion here is supply driven skill development versus demand driven. How, as a dedicated sort of company that focuses on skill development for rural populations, how do you think about this, and how do you operate?
I'll start with much before all this noise on skill development came up, we did a lot of skill development in the villages. And fundamentally what we understood is we were dealing with communities who were caught in a kind of a poverty trap. And because of that they were unable to get out, come out and acquire some skills which would take them to a level. From there on, they can just pick the straws. The more than the aspects of as far as demand is concerned today, our own experience has been that there is adequate demand across sectors. There is a huge demand for entry-level jobs, for semi-skilled, skilled people. This is across sectors. I say construction, I say telecom, retail to a large extent, and even in agri-processing sectors, textiles. You name the sector. The buzzword is you don't have enough people who are skilled. So I think the demand is available across sectors. What is lacking is the understanding of the ground realities in most respects. And the ground realities are that, like Mr. Roy said, training is the easiest path, skilling somebody. But post the skilling, to make the whole thing irreversible, that is where the role of the trainer comes in. And that has been a fundamental experience. Because post training, he goes into an environment often which is alien to him. There is a cultural difference. Even if he moves, let's say, from Kandhamal in Orissa to Bhubaneswar, which is just 5 hours, the cultural difference between these two locations are phenomenal. Again, they are women who are more vulnerable. And we know, I can't really say pinpoint to which locations, but across sectors where women are employed in large numbers, there is a certain amount of exploitation, especially sexual exploitation, which can shock the people who come from these communities. For somebody who lived all her life in Kandhamal, for her to go to an environment where a stranger is groping, these are the kinds of problems that they face at one end. Or they are alien to, the structured environments in, let's say, a McDonald's or Cafe Coffee Day, which is one of the humongous employers. You send them 100, they will hire 100. You send them 1,000, they will hire 1,000. They just keep needing people all the time. The trainees, when they go to these locations, are unable to cope up with that kind of working environment. Whether it is with the kind of language they use or whether it is the rigor that is brought in, you have to stand up for 12 hours. There are 12, sometimes 13-hour shifts. Or if you take paramedics, there is a lot of hospitals where hospitals require paramedics all the time. Getting them the basic placement is not a problem. Getting the candidates to join there is also not a problem. The key problem has been, in many instances, I won't say in all instances, there are a number of companies which do adhere to ethical practices. In many instances has been their exploitation. Paramedics work for 12 hours, 15 hours, and they are paid paltry sums which are way below the minimum wages. In fact, in this particular, in Orissa, we had trained a bunch of about 500 people as paramedics, and they were unwilling to work in hospitals. They would rather work at home with geriatric care, and where they are at least safe with a set of loving people. They get food, they get decent salary, if not the minimum wages. We had to resolve that because the monitoring agencies wanted salary slips and in organized sector employment kind of a thing, whereas the preference of the candidates was to not join any of these organized hospitals. So there are a number of issues post their joining. What we have done is we have helplines. We've been counseling these candidates, encouraging them to call the helplines. Tell them whenever you have a problem, call us. If there's somebody who is misbehaving, call us. We are here for almost about a year, we monitor. This makes the whole thing irreversible. Otherwise, we found in not many, but in substantial number of instances, where the 3 months of training and then 4-5 months of hand holding has had negative effect. In fact, when they go back and say, don't join this training, you land in hell. This can have a tremendously negative impact.
Interesting.
Of course, there was in the last meeting which the PIA had, where the minister was also present. He was informed of this, and of course,
right.
The key thing is for the trainers themselves to engage with these candidates to be able to do it.
Thank you. So this is a very important message about the importance of the easiest thing is to impart training, but then how to keep that, how to translate that into a sustainable impact is really what we are struggling with. We have 5-6 minutes. We can take a few questions from the floor. If anybody has any questions, please identify yourselves and fire away.
Hello, my name is Mahesh. I'm with NSDC. This is a question for the madam, Sharda. This on the PRI thing, what you're talking about, all the systems and policies and schemes and everything is getting decentralized is one thing. And then at the institutional level, at a village area, you're talking about Anganwadis or Gram Panchayats or village associations. While they are being formed, Gram Sabhas don't meet on the 24th. There's no minutes. It's not reviewed. Projects are allocated based on caste. It's still hamlets in places like Jharkhand. What is the solution to, while all the schemes are being decentralized, but what is the solution to resolving the ground level problems? Because if you look at the Panchayati Raj, even in Jharkhand, there's no money to do capacity building. Where does it come from? Is it untied funds and all that? Yeah. That is one. And in this report, there is an interesting graph wherein if you look at the women representation in PRIs, all the states which are considered least developed, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, the representation is very high of women. If you look at states like Gujarat, which is on the far end, while it's developed, the representation of women is very low. Again, is there something to learn from that?
Can we take a couple of more questions and we can answer them at once? If there are any other questions? Yeah, there's a question here, gentlemen.
I'm Chetan from Hindustan Times. In India, the poverty reduction is considered to be only a government job. Primarily because the private sector has not gone into the backward areas for rural development, providing skills. And even if you see the National Skill Development Mission, most of the skill development centers have come in urban centers. It hasn't gone to the backward areas. So do you think, Mr. Roy or somebody else, that the private sector hasn't played its role, which it should have played in poverty alleviation and providing a better rural economy?
Last question.
I'm Ramani Iyer. One issue that I wanted to bring it up to the panel and IDFC is this role of training. What a lot of us believe, sitting in cities and whatever, that we have a democracy where the voice of people must be heard, etc., etc., etc. But at the grassroots level, is there enough done to make people aware that they can govern themselves? Okay, apart from procedures and funds and whatever, what is the way they could sort of say, we will govern things ourselves, whether district planning council or the panchayat or whatever. The point I wanted to make was, many centuries ago, institutions which have been actually engaged in local democracy. If you go to a small village called Uttara Merur in near Kanchipuram, there is a place where democracy was practiced thoroughly and with absolute rules. They're all written down there. The structures still exist. But in many of these places, the so-called democracy has been sort of abrogated by the political parties. As a result that, the rulers have no connection with local people to rule themselves. Can the next report or whatever we are talking address this particular issue? That's the point.
Last question, Mr. Alawadi.
I'm V.S. Alawadi.
panchayat bureaucrat. I would like to ask a particular question to Sharada or
we can't hear you.
Mr. Madan. You know, the two issues which come up in the rural landscape is that while we find the dynamics, change is taking place, the challenges which are coming up at the panchayati institutional level is that, as everybody talks about devolution of functions, to make them more effective, to make them more meaningful. But how does this come about? We heard the minister saying that states are not willing to transfer it. But unless we are able to have, it will differ from state to state, from area to area, that you got to see what are the socio-economic and cultural demographics of that area is. And then what kind of a function must be devolved. It's no use saying you devolve about 21 functions which are listed in the Constitution. Is anybody looking at this, that how much of it we can make it a practical approach in this? Otherwise, as long as we remain macro, we keep blaming. But someone can make a breakthrough. Is it possible? Many suggestions come.
Right. It seems that most of the questions are addressed to you, so we'll start with you, Sharada.
Maybe I'd like to take the last question first, with regard to the devolution of functions and how the panchayat institutions actually practically can get to can get to deliver governance, given that the scenario is so diverse and so different across the country. We are actually trying to do something there in the NRLM, and we are pushing. We're trying to develop proof of concept of how the panchayats can perform by doing a three-pronged integration of the PRI with the NREGA program plus the NRLM itself. So how can we look at the Panchayat Raj institutions strengthening, being involved and engaging institutions of the poor? How can NREGA contribute to this? And why do we choose NREGA? Because of the fact that no matter what panchayat, where in the country, the Gram Panchayat is enabled with funds and with powers under the NREGA program. So that gives an opportunity for us to, in a sense, to tell Hanuman that look, you can jump. And it's about telling them that there are opportunities here, you need to see that. And no one really has gone down to the panchayat to talk about what are the governance mechanisms, how do they deliver this program well to the poor, what are the benefits that there are for improved good governance, and perhaps even their political, what is the political mileage in it. And when you look at elected representatives, you need to also talk in terms of long-term political mileage. What is your political mileage in empowering the institution of the poor? What is your political mileage in bringing in good governance, in bringing in institutions, in bringing in a school that functions, where the midday meal works, where the teachers are actually coming every day, and the children learn, where you can perhaps change malnutrition and reduce your malnutrition and look at targeting that. Our experience has also been that if you take that kind of language to a political leadership, local political leadership, it has been across the board, we have found that they respond to this far more proactively than an official leadership does. And that therefore there is hope. That all we need to do is, perhaps if we can start, practically it means let's start with the program which is giving 20, 30 lakhs or even crores to the Gram Panchayat, and get the panchayat to actually own it, use it to good use, and see the benefits of it. And that is something that we are planning, that we hope will be able to change the face of local democracy. And that itself, by extension to the second last question too, where it is also about deepening democracy, and how can we ensure that democracy is not abrogated by the political parties. At the end of the day, finally, the institution which legitimately should be responsible for the for well-being of the society and especially of the poor is government. And this is government at its local level. But the government at the local level does not perceive itself as government. It sees itself as a delivery mechanism. And it's important to inculcate the right kind of idea of governance in that political mechanism. It is also important equally to empower citizenship. Because unless there is a powerful citizenship, you will not make that government accountable. And the rationale and justification for political processes is that those political processes, the way they play out, finally will ensure that everybody is part of that political process. There have been extremely good traditional panchayats, but then we also have the Khap Panchayat, which is a continuation of the early caste panchayat. So that we cannot, it cannot be, it might deliver benevolent, good governance, but it can never really be said to be truly representative. And so therefore we need to have institutions of government led by the state that are truly representative and which the people of the country can hold accountable. It's about making that accountability happen, which would in a sense perhaps also take on that first question of, and I would like to, it's a point that I've been trying to think about. Why would you have high representation of women in Jharkhand and have low representation of women in developed institutions? Maybe in the developed institutions, they see the power of governance, whereas in Jharkhand, they think, okay, there is not much scope anyway, so let's bring the women in, and anyway, we can handle them by proxy. But in Jharkhand, in Assam, you will find that in these states, the local panchayats are actually just raving to go. The women are raving to go. They believe that they can do, that they can bring about change. There are some of them who have come from SHG federations, who have already known a sense of power. There are others who are willing to learn that sense of power. And because of the fact that they've not been in local governance for so many years, these are fantastic testing grounds to just take this convergence forward. And actually Jharkhand is right now a front runner for PRI convergence under the government program. Finally, about the DPC too. I come from a state where the DPC is functional. And it is functional as an extension of the fact that the Panchayati Raj institutions themselves are functional. And because the government has been able to see Panchayati Raj not just as decentralization of various schemes of the government, but as devolution of power and capability to the local government. And this devolution came about when the panchayats did not have the capability of handling anything. That devolution that capability was built simultaneously with the maturing of the panchayats. In the beginning, it was mayhem. In Kerala, where Kerala does not have a history of local governance in terms of empowered Panchayati Raj institutions, and post 73rd and 74th amendments, it was total mayhem there. Panchayats were doing all kinds of things and not looking at the interests of the poor. They were subverting interests of the poor. But these very panchayats now have become institutions of the poor, for the poor.
Well, I know there were other questions, but we are really running out of time. We'll have to vacate these premises. So we are under very severe time constraints. So I will have to bring this session to a close with a very big thank you to all our panelists for participating and sharing their views. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you so much for that captivating and sometimes very sobering discussion on the theme. And it is our hope that with the wider dissemination of the report, there would be indeed more debate and more importantly action on the ground. As a token of our appreciation, we'd like to leave each of you with a memento, and I'd request my colleagues to hand over the gifts to Professor Surinder Jotka, to Sarda Muralidharan, to Dunu Roy, Sachit Madan, and G. Venugopal. Ritu now will deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. As we come to the close of the function, it is my pleasure to give the vote of thanks on behalf of IDFC Foundation. We express our gratitude to the Minister of Rural Development, Shri Jairam Ramesh, for coming here to release the Rural Development Report and for his keen interest and thought-provoking questions throughout the process. We also thank Dr. Mihir Shah, the chairman of the Advisory Council, for his guidance and support in the preparation of this report. Preparing a report on rural development of this scale is challenging and would not have been possible without the contributions, insight, and support of many. And in fact, there are too many to name right now, but you will see them acknowledged in the report. The Advisory Council, as well as the Minister and Dr. Mihir Shah, were quite exacting, and Dr. Rajiv Lal. So as you can see, we were under a lot of pressure and had to really respond to very deep questions. So we express our heartfelt thanks to the Advisory Council, which constituted eminent academicians and practitioners. I could mention Professor K.L. Krishna, Shri P.S. Vijay Shankar, Mr. Ram Manohar Reddy, Professor Satish Deshpande, and from the Ministry, Shri S. Vijay Kumar, Secretary, and of course Dr. Rajiv Lal. Throughout the process, although they were demanding, they were very supportive. From the Ministry of Rural Development, we have many thanks to several officials, and in particular, we would also like to thank Mr. Varad Pandey and Mr. C.R.K. Nair. I'd like to thank our partner institutions, CES, IRMA, IGIDR, for their valuable inputs and often disagreements, discussions, and so on, which all formed part of the process. We are also very grateful to the panelists for making the time to come and share their experiences and insights. And in particular, it really was important for us to get people who were working on the ground and who knew the issues from the real and the real challenges. I would very much like to thank the policy group of IDFC Foundation for all the really hard work that went into it. They are the anonymous people who were the solid back spine of this work. Special thanks are also due to our consulting editor, Beena Sanghavi, and our publishers, Orient Black Swan. An event like this could not have happened overnight. For that, I would like to thank all those who worked tirelessly over the past few weeks to make this event possible. The Corporate Communications Department and the whole team have played a very critical role in organizing this event. Our colleagues in the foundation, in the Delhi office, and in Mumbai have been great support. For providing the location for the report release function, I would like to thank the Constitution Club of India. And of course, I would like to thank the media, both print media and electronic, for the extensive coverage of this event. And finally, and most importantly, I would like to thank all of you for coming to participate and to support this. May I now invite you all to join us for lunch in the next hall. Thank you very much. Okay.